Hello, everybody, and welcome into a Thursday night theory show where we go over the Thursday night football game, what these numbers mean in the adjusted line play report, so you can get an idea of how, in my mind, that I build these game scenarios out, what players are going to do well, what players are not going to do well, all in the context of a single game matchup. And been pretty successful here in the last few weeks with almost taking down some tournaments. Having all 100% of my lineups cash, so it's been pretty effective here. So we'll get into that this week. I do want everybody to know that I'll be putting out the main slate show. So the main show that I put out typically on Saturday morning. I will be with family this weekend, so I will not be able to record that on Saturday. I'm going to record that on Thursday night and send that out. Might not even be able to get out the Twitter updates, so keep that in mind. If you're interested in the adjusted line play report, you might not see the Twitter stuff on there. So we'll get into the Thursday night theory here. We have Seattle heading into Dallas. Dallas is 9-point home favorites. It's a 46 Vegas game total overall, giving Dallas a 27.5 team implied total and Seattle an 18.7 or 18.5 team implied total. Getting into the home team, which we usually go into first, Seattle. That offensive pass protection versus defensive pass rush category here, that is the adjusted sack rate. So if you're new to this, the adjusted sack rate, not all sacks are created equal. If you get a sack, alarm going off there to wake up. If you get sacked on a 3rd and 20, that's not going to be worth as much as one where perhaps it's 1st and 5 and you're not expecting the team to throw it all. You're expecting a run. If they get a sack on 1st and 5, that's worth a lot more than one that's on 3rd and 20 or 4th and 25, something like that. Those don't count as much. So same goes with the defense and the offensive line. So if the offense is giving them up on 3rd and 20, it's not going to count for as much as it would if it was a sack on 1st and 5, something like that. But the more sacks that you take, the worse it is for your offensive pass protection. The more sacks that you get, the better for your defensive pass rush. Just they're not all created equal. So if both teams are averaging 3 sacks a week, one might be ranked number 8 because they're happening on times where you wouldn't suggest it. Another one might be ranked 19th because they're happening on 3rd and 20s and times that you would expect people to get sacks. So that's what these numbers are. And same when we get into Dallas, adjusted sack rate. Seattle at number 19, Dallas at number 11. We know Dallas can get after the quarterback, but this is kind of suggesting it's slightly in the favor here of Dallas's defensive line. We'd expect a little bit more pressure on Seattle. It's not an astronomical difference here, which is good for Seattle's offense, but I would expect them to kind of be under a little bit of duress here with the Dallas defense and needing to get the ball out perhaps a little bit quicker than they would like to. And typically we've seen that kind of benefit Tyler Lockett the most. Maybe Jackson Smith and Jigba gets a few more targets. The running backs could see a few more targets there, like Charbonnet. So keep that in mind. But it's not like a huge discrepancy here. It'd be a little bit more concerning if Seattle was in the red and Dallas was in the green. So top 10 versus like a bottom 10 team. That's when you'd expect them to really be under a lot of duress and have their pass game kind of affected by the pass rush. Getting into the offensive pass DVOA, defensive pass DVOA. What is the DVOA? That's defensive adjusted value over average. So it takes historical context, game context, historically, what down and distance are you, at what point in the game, and what's the score. So let's just say it's, a 3-point lead. You're on your opponent's 25-yard line. It's 3rd and 2. The typical pass play on something like that results in X amount of yards or an X amount of like a play, essentially. Were you better than that average result in history on those particular situations, or was your result worse than that? So if you don't complete a pass, it would count for probably worse because the average outcome is probably a completed pass for some positive yardage. In those scenarios, you would lose a little bit of value against the average, and that's kind of how the DVOA works. Were you better or worse than the average outcome on that particular play, given the situation in the game, where you are on the field, how much time is left, what quarter it is, and like the score. So that's kind of how it's taken into account. It's just an algorithm that says were you better or worse than that average. So Dallas number 6, they've been really, really good against the pass here. And then Seattle kind of middle of the pack here at 15 in the offensive pass DVOA. So this is telling me not only is Seattle going to be under a little bit of pressure, but they're probably going to be pretty inefficient in that pass game. Just, they're middle of the pack. Dallas is a top 6 team in that regards. They're probably just going to struggle a little bit to move the ball via the air. It's not an astronomical problem. They're just going to be a little bit more ineffective. And typically in these situations, like if the run game is really good, the pass game, I would say this is a situation where it's going to kind of stall out some of the drives. Unfortunately for Seattle, it looks like the run game is even worse scenario for them than the pass game. So getting into the run blocking, Seattle number 14, Dallas number 8. What are these run blocking numbers and run stopping numbers? Similar to the offensive pass protection, it kind of assigns a rating to the outcome of each individual run. So if you get stopped behind the line of scrimmage as a running back, -2, -1, anything like that, that's going to count for really, really bad on the offensive line, because if a running back's getting hit behind the offensive line or behind the line of scrimmage, that's on the offensive line. That's not on the running back. If they're getting 0, 1, 2 yards, something like that, that's also probably going to be on the offensive line. But it's not as bad as them getting hit behind the line of scrimmage, and then you start thinking, hey, 3, 4, 5 yard runs, those, the offensive line's being pretty effective there, making sure that their guys are getting, at least 3 to 4 or 5 yards on their run. A 5 to 8 yard run is probably going to be worth a little bit better for the offensive line, and then a 10 plus yard would be kind of like the best outcome, where, hey, everything was blocked great. They had a 10 plus yard run. That doesn't just happen without the offensive line being very good on that particular play and making sure that all the blocks are taken care of. So that's what the offensive run blocking and defensive run stopping is. How good were they at kind of behind the line of scrimmage, at the line of scrimmage, preventing some of these bigger runs? Seattle middle of the pack at number 14, so they're decent, but Dallas is top 10 at number 8 in defensive run stopping. This is telling me on a play-to-play basis, it's going to be a little bit in favor of Dallas, so expect a lot of probably 0 to 4, 0 to 5 yard runs in this game for the Seattle run attack. The DVOA, similar to the past DVOA, it's, how good were you compared to historical averages, given the game situation, where you are in the field, how much time's left, what quarter it is, what's the score, how much are you up, how much are you down, things like that. So offensive run DVOA for Seattle actually not very good at 22. That's below average for the entire league. And Dallas in the top 10 at number 9 in the defensive run DVOA. So this is telling me not only is Seattle going to kind of struggle in the pass game, but it's going to be even worse for them in the run game. This DVOA is really telling me that, Charbonnet is probably going to have a rough go of it. I think Walker is either questionable or doubtful yet for this particular game, so keep that in mind. Again, we're looking at this in an island game context, so if you're looking for Seattle players to put into your captain lineups, doesn't look like any of the Seattle players I would be particularly interested in getting in as a captain. But if I'm going to attack anything on here, I would say I'd be going Tyler Lockett routes. Seattle is projected for 18.5 points, which is pretty low, projected to be down, so they're probably going to be passing a bunch. And just the way that this offense looks like it's struggling, in my mind, it's probably going to be Seattle kicker or one of these players like Lockett, and that's really the only player from Seattle that I'm going to want on my squad, because it doesn't look like they're going to score a lot of points. And when you think about selecting the top 6 fantasy scores on the one particular game, if Seattle's really struggling, they're going to have a lot of people that are probably below 6-7 fantasy points in there. Who's going to be scoring a little bit more than that? and kind of what's their price. So Lockett and the kicker here for Seattle would probably be where I'm going to focus a lot of my attention in this particular Thursday night matchup. Just doesn't look like they're going to score a lot of points. If they score, 2 field goals and a touchdown, somebody scores that just happens to be random. That kicker might be scoring you 8 or 9 points, depending on how long those field goals were. So that's kind of the route that I'm going, is Seattle kicker and maybe Tyler Lockett. But it doesn't look super good for their offense in this matchup. Now, getting into the Dallas side, defensive pass rush versus offensive pass protection. Again, this is adjusted sack rate. Dallas top 8 in adjusted sack rate. Seattle in the red in the defensive pass rush. This is telling me Dallas is going to have a lot of time to throw the ball. They shouldn't be under that much pressure in this particular matchup. And that's going to be good for their pass game. They're just going to be able to throw the ball to who they want to. It does seem like recently the ball has been spread out a little bit more. I know earlier in the season it was almost exclusively like CeeDee Lamb and Ferguson, but typically when they got a lot of time like this, we can see other guys like Brandon Cooks and sometimes Michael Gallup get involved, although Gallup has been pretty poor and he's been kind of relegated there with Jalen Tolbert to 4th or 5th on the list in pecking order in terms of targets. So you're going to have Ferguson, Lamb, Cook probably as your top 3, and then perhaps the running back Tony Pollard there as like a 4th option, and then you're getting into where Gallup and Tolbert kind of reside in the pecking order and in the order of operations for the quarterback to get to in their progressions. Anyway, lots of time for Dallas to throw. They shouldn't be under too much pressure in this matchup. Getting into the DVOA, again, that's against historical averages. Dallas top 10 at number 7, Seattle at 23. This is telling me that Dallas on a play-to-play basis is going to be pretty efficient, pretty effective in the pass game. They should be able to move the ball very, very well, which is a good thing for them. And really, red versus green matchups, these are the ones that you always want to look for, because that's a huge, a bottom 10 team versus a top 10 team in those categories. And right now we have Dallas offensive pass game looking really good against Seattle's bottom 10 defense in the pass game. So expect Dallas offense to be very, very effective. Dak certainly in play along with his pass catchers there. Getting into the run blocking side, that's a bit more even. Dallas, number 12 in the offensive run blocking. Seattle, number 11 in defensive run stopping. Again, think of, was it a negative yardage? Was it right at the line of scrimmage, 1 yard, 2 yard, versus like a 3 to 5 yard run versus a 5 to 10 yard run versus a 10+ yard run? Those all affect. The better the outcome, like a 10+ yard run, that's going to count for the best for that offensive line. If it's behind the line of scrimmage, the worst. Dallas actually number 12. Seattle's defense number 11. That's pretty even. In those scenarios, when it's pretty even, I like to say, hey, the studs are going to eat in a particular matchup like this, where, the offensive line is kind of a stalemate. There's nothing like an advantage for the defense. There's nothing an advantage for the offense. But if you have somebody that's really good at football, they can overcome that stuff and find those holes and perform at a pretty high rate. I think Pollard is a stud. It's just kind of a off year for him. We'll see what happens in this, but those are a situation where it'd be like, hey, if they got a stud on the other side running the ball, he's going to have a pretty effective game just because the offensive line and defensive line is pretty neutrally matched. Getting into the run DVOA, Dallas 21, Seattle number 18. This kind of speaks to Dallas being fairly ineffective, or Pollard being pretty ineffective in the run game, not getting a ton of explosive plays. They are 21st in run DVOA, so compared to historical averages, they've been a little bit below the league average for outcomes, and Seattle at 18, a little bit below average as well. But both of those, pretty evenly matched. Seattle's slight favor in both. This is just telling me that the run game isn't going to be as effective as the pass game. If I'm attacking an island game, I'm going to attack that pass game pretty extensively. The good thing for that pass game is at least for Tony Pollard, is he does catch passes. I don't know how much he's going to be needed in terms of getting dumped off. If there's a number 1 versus number 8 in the offensive pass protection, I'd expect Dallas to be under pressure and need to get the ball out a little bit quicker. And I would favor Ferguson or Pollard getting some of those quicker throws and those dump offs as that defense is getting after him. But with a lot more time, Pollard is probably going to have a few less dump offs, but if he's running some routes out there, some decent routes, he could see, some explosive plays there in the pass game as a route runner versus just getting some dump offs sent his way. But really looking at this with the Vegas line at 46, Dallas favored by 9 currently at home. Just the way the pass game's setting up, I'm really going to attack that Dallas pass game. The defense here from Dallas, it's not a huge thing in terms of getting sacks, but Seattle looks like they're going to struggle to score. So Dallas's defense might be in play here, especially if they're going to be scoring a decent amount of points and Seattle's just going to have to throw. We might see Dallas with quite a few opportunities, at least for sacks and some interceptions, things like that. I could see Dallas in terms of DK points, scoring in the double digits, 12, 13 points, and that could be certainly good enough to get into the top 6 performers on the slate. So that is kind of how it looks like in terms of what these numbers mean. We do have pace of play. And really, let's get into that because I don't think I've explained that very much. But overall pace of play, just in general, how quickly does this offense play? Hey, Seattle's ranked number 7. So all it is how many times have you ran a play, and basically how long does it take you to run a play? How many seconds in between each particular play are you taking? Offensive neutral situation pace of play. So this is compared to everybody else's offensive neutral situation. What this means is basically taking out the fourth quarter and taking out the 2-minute drill in the second quarter. We consider those offensive neutral situations where they're not trying to push the pace due to the kind of the last 2 minutes of the first half, right? Or the fourth quarter where things may be getting out of hand. An offensive neutral situation, that also means that the score is usually within 6 points. It's not like a blowout. Actually, I think the offensive neutral situation means it's within 10 points or 13 points. So what's the pace of play during that? They're 13th. Offensive pace of play when they're leading by 7+. This isn't all the way open here, but when they're leading by 7+ points, no matter what the situation is, how quickly do they play? How many snaps per second are they getting off? Things like that. Offensive pace of play when the game is within 6 points. So very similar to the offensive neutral situation, except it's going to also include situations where you're in the 2-minute drill and the fourth quarter, and it's within 6 points. And then offensive pace of play when you're trailing by 7 or more points. So it looks like Seattle's actually a pretty fast, in terms of pace of play team. 13th in offensive neutral situation, 7th overall. Again, this overall pace of play can be skewed. Let's just say Seattle finds themselves trailing by 7+ in a lot of games, and they're one of the faster teams when they're trailing in the league. When you're trailing, you're typically a lot faster than when you're leading anyway, so that's going to kind of skew this overall pace of play, which is why the offensive neutral situation pace of play comes into effect pretty good there, because that takes into account how close the game is and then taking out the 2-minute drill in the fourth quarter. Getting into the Dallas side, they are 23rd in overall pace of play. Fourth, actually, an offensive neutral situation. So they're actually one of the faster teams in the league when the game when the game script isn't necessarily dictating the play calling. They are one of the fastest teams in the league. The reason that their overall pace of play is 23rd is because they spend a lot of the game time leading, and they're 19th in pace of play when leading. Again, most teams when they're leading play slower than when they're trailing. It's just kind of the human nature. Hey, we got the lead, let's sit on it, let's run the ball a little bit more. That's typically what happens, and Dallas has spent a lot of time leading, which is why this overall pace of play is so slow. In the leading one, they're kind of below average when leading by 7 or more points. When the game is within 6 points, again, similar to the offensive neutral situation, but including the 2-minute drill in fourth quarter, they are 7th overall. And then Dallas is actually pretty slow, and they're trailing by 7+ points. I don't know how much they've done that outside of the San Francisco game, but one of the slower teams in the league when they're trailing. So that's kind of why their overall pace of play is 23rd. But when the game's close and not out of hand, they are one of the faster teams in the league. So with Seattle just being faster in general, Dallas being fast when it's close, we could see some explosion here from Dallas in that first half while they kind of rack up those points. Again, I think if you're attacking an island game matchup, you're going to want the Dallas pass game. Pollard certainly has disappointed this year. I don't know how popular he's going to be, but he could find himself with a few scoring opportunities with Dallas's offense being so good here in the pass game. They could just be driving down the field, and he could have plenty of opportunities where they get inside the 20-yard line, and he's getting some opportunities there to plunge it into the end zone. Certainly within the realm of possibility, but I think a lot of the heavy lifting from Dallas's offense is going to come from the pass game this week. All right, that's going to do it for the Thursday Night Theory. Hopefully you learned a little bit about what these numbers mean in the adjusted line play report, and you can go out there and use this information to make better start-sit decisions, win some money in DFS, prop bets, things like that. That's what we're here for. Always going to be free. Always putting it out on YouTube, Twitter. Never going to charge you anything for this sort of info. So really appreciate the views. Hopefully you learned a little bit. Like I said, you can go out and win some money. Watch out tomorrow, Thursday evening. I will be recording the main show and putting that out on Thursday evening or Friday morning for a release. And hopefully we can have a good week. I'm going to go see some family and have a good weekend as well. Probably not going to be as active on Twitter or anything, but keep that in mind. Thursday, we'll have the main slate, no Saturday stuff, and potentially no stuff on Twitter if that's your main route of accessing this info. Have a good one, folks. Thank you. Bye.